going to be a real good in-depth view of what you can do with cross-site scripting. It's an attack. There are security presentations you can go see where they do an excellent job of doing some very entertaining attacks with it. That's not what I'm going to cover. What I'm going to be covering is from a .NET perspective, what are some tools that you can use to protect against it, and where are they available? So obviously you have to start off with the definition. This is just straight up stolen from OWASP, but cross-site scripting in general, and I'll let you read this, I'm not going to repeat it, is basically I write a script, I stick it out there somewhere, and then it goes and executes on that person's, on some other user's machine, and they think it comes from the site, so they trust it. What can go wrong there? Interestingly, one of the early examples of a worm created with cross-site scripting was from the MySpace world, for those of you all who remember that one. Because Sammy is actually my hero, I figure I should mention this. He successfully hit 1 million users within 20 hours and all it did was it put a tag on his on their MySpace page, and it said, most of all, Sammy is my hero, sent a friend request to him, and then everybody who went to their page, well, they saw it and it wound up on their page as well. But think about this. This is a while back. For those of you who remember MySpace, you have a general idea of time frame here. And it hit 1 million users within 20 hours. That's pretty fast spread. Now, I mentioned OWASP, just real quick. They do have a local chapter here that does presentations on cybersecurity. You can go learn a few things there. And if you want to know what can be done with cross-site scripting, they're an excellent resource for it. The other thing I would like to mention about them is that they do a top 10 list of critical security, let's get this right here, top 10 most critical web application security risks list. I believe the most recent one came out in 2017. If you are a developer and you write software that somebody might, you write web applications that somebody might want to hack, not necessarily somebody who's overly ambitious or skilled, but if there's an off chance that somebody might try to hack it, you should probably read the list and just see what they identify so that you're aware of it. Now, cross-site scripting comes in two primary varieties. The first of them is your stored cross-site script. This is the one most people would think of, and the one that Sammy pulled off with his worm. You put in, say, a comment field, your script, it gets saved to the database, and then it gets replayed for whoever comes to the website. We also have reflected cross-site scripting. Now, when I first learned about this one, I thought, well, that's kind of useless. But somebody explained, actually somebody at OWASP explained why this was a risk. If I create a link to a site, and that site displays some aspect of that link, I can go ahead and put that link out there in an email. You're going to read, hey, I'm going to dominion.com. You may think, okay, I know that site, I have to go pay my electric bill on a regular basis. And you may click the link and not read the remainder of it to see what all is getting fed in. Well, if they display a query string value from that link and they don't properly escape it, you just executed whatever that code was on your computer. So if you are displaying anything that you get from the user, regardless of where you get it from, regardless of how long you store it, you should probably put in some effort to protect your users frequently at work. Okay, I know you all are using the framework rather than core because they didn't transfer that as I understand it. Does anybody here use MVC in .NET Framework? So we've got a few examples. And does anybody use .NET Core? Is anybody thinking that they might wind up transitioning to .NET Core in the future? If you're writing code in .NET, there's a chance you're going to convert at some point. Here's a key thing about these protections. If you've been operating in the .NET framework world, you have some fairly powerful protections built into the framework that do not exist in Core. So what I'm showing you right now, it's good, it's powerful. OWASP does recommend that you not solely depend on this, though, to be fair, I've been guilty of this several times. And what this does is if you do not turn it off, by default in .NET, when your web app detects a script coming in, it will crash. It will throw up a big ugly error and say no. Where does that help you? Well, it means if you didn't think about it, you're okay in most cases. Now, who here has ever had to turn off that protection? Okay. I've had users who've wanted to put in email templates that were done in HTML, and the admin wanted to be able to edit the HTML right there through the console, or right there through the website. Fairly reasonable request, low risk, and the admin is fairly trustworthy, we think, or hope, or we're in trouble if they're not. Internal admin, internal app, if that person's an insider threat, we've got a problem. So naturally, what do? You trust them, or if your company's paranoid, you don't, and you have to manage that stuff by SQL script and you're on your own. Either is an option. So to turn it off, the first thing is in both MVC and in web forms, you're going to have to add this script right here. Oh, you don't get to see my cursor. This script right here. HTTP runtime request validation mode equals 2.0. What this does is it slows down the protection. It delays it so that it will consider other variables. Now, if you're just going to trust all your inputs, or better, and this is the better option than what you should be doing, if you're not going to trust any of your inputs, you do have the option of just turning it off for the whole website. Once you put that in your config, you can stick this value right here. Inside the system.web in the web config, you can say pages validate request equals false, and you've just turned off request validation completely in your .NET Web Forms app. What this means is, like Core, you now need to validate every input to make sure your users are not attacking you. But that does mean that you get to have prettier error messages if you do that. Personally, I don't think you should really be turning it off for the whole web page, because you don't know if the next person maintain that app is going to be aware of the fact that they're not going to have these protections and how conscientious they are. So I think you're better off putting in a more tailored solution. You can do that by, on an individual page, marking it as page validate request equals false, and that will turn it off for that specific page. Or for the example that I gave you, where it's the email template, well, I've got a single text box that handles the email template, so I can just go ahead and say on my text box definition, sorry about that, validate mode disabled. And suddenly, I can put in my scripts. My users can put in their HTML, and we're good to go. Now, if you're doing MVC, it's a little different. Oh, please go ahead.
Does that last option leave you open to a different kind of attack? Does that render that validate disabled on the front end? Could the user just remove that from their DOM and then force your application to validate and crash?
I don't think so.
Which one are you talking about?
So,
The last one, I'm assuming that ASP text box
Yeah, that's
yeah.
the server-side tag. That's the server-side tag, so it's going to be
So the front end doesn't do the validation period.
Right.
None of,
It puts
so
a field on it, right?
it puts a field on there. None of this is happening on the front end. All of this is the data has been sent from the front end to the server, and the server is determining, the server intercepts the data, because this can only happen in IIS. It intercepts the data and it looks at it and it says, is this a concern? And the server itself has this side of the code. So it knows what I told it would be acceptable.
So how does, when you use that tag, what kind of HTML is transformed?
But,
It has a
yeah,
special ID,
yeah,
and when that comes back on the form post, the server does.
Oh, the server matched the ID? Okay.
yeah, yeah. And so within
But if you remove that ID, does it still leave you potentially open?
no,
Validating it?
I haven't tried that. What I would assume would happen,
In the HTTP request,
yeah.
but your code is not going to access it the same way, because your code's looking for that text ASP, that text box control, and you could still get to that value, but you have to want to get to that value if you took the ID out.
And if you removed it from that ID, what I'm not sure about is, would the server know that it maps to something that it's supposed to trust, or would it throw the error? And I think it would throw the error and say, this is something that I was not told to accept scripts from. But I have, but what?
So would you recommend not to do that or not to do that?
I would do it at the text box level, because the worst thing somebody's going to do, the worst probable outcome that somebody's going to pull off, and you can test this yourself. It's the fun thing about these is you can test these vulnerabilities yourself. The worst thing that I would expect to happen from that is that somebody edits it themselves and winds up being unable to send the file when they were supposed to be. So they,
Make your app crash?
my app would crash for that user, but that's fine. If somebody wants to try to mess with my inputs that I gave them to fill in and do something I didn't want them to do, and my app crashes because of it and tells them, no, you can't proceed, I'm okay with it.
Well, that kind of stepping back, the only reason that you want to do this is if you want to allow your user to enter something like HTML or script, something that the server considers unsafe. And then that's kind of what you were saying, Gary. If you're allowing them to enter something that's deemed unsafe, you need to check it yourself. So if you're bypassing the built-in logic, you're going to have to do your own checks on your side.
So any other questions on the web forms front? So I'm going to switch over to the MVC real quick here. And if you look at MVC, I'm just going to cover how to decorate a action and a specific field so that it will accept HTTP or scripts. Now, you can, please, was there a question? Oh, okay. On an action, on your controller, you just put this little decorator right there at the top of it, say, don't validate the inputs, and that action will accept will accept scripts, and you will need to handle those as you see fit. If you decorate a specific field on your model, then that field will accept scripts. Okay.
Like as far as the web page, I mean, it's
Okay.
mostly when you allow users to generate content for your website. Is there any other scenario?
When you allow users to submit values that might get reflected. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't, so,
to generate,
yeah,
what I meant.
but it might be, so a comment box, you allow your users to give comments.
Yeah,
You allow them to input values that maybe are visible to your admins. So let's say it's all you're doing is you're taking orders. Well, if your admin has the ability to view that order and they have some text box when they fill in the order, if your text box took a script and somebody on your side of the house views it, are you handling that correctly? Anytime you take input from a user, there is a chance that at some point in the future, you're going to want to display that input somewhere. There's a significant chance. And if you're not displaying it now, there's a huge chance that the next developer who works on the system, or the one after them, is going to add the ability to view it. And if you haven't protected the data already, if you haven't already made sure it was clean and safe, are they going to escape that data? And that just depends on who they are and what they are, and you have to decide what steps you want to take there. So, all right, I think I need to.
Even though Garrett's, showing .NET, right, specific examples, this applies to any programming language that you're working in, whether you're PHP, Ruby on Rails, Perl. I mean, you need to consider the input that's being coming from your users and protecting your application and yourself from what they're sending, because honestly, you can't really trust anybody, and so.
so, yeah, no. Because I was just thinking, this is kind of like that joke with the Bobby tables.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
for the for the browser side of the.
Yeah, so just real quick, if I can figure out how to, there we go. Just real quick, here's a very simple cross-site scripting example. And I am allowing this one to go through. And as you can see right there, it says, it's just a pop-up that says cross-site scripting. This is an overly simplified example. There are very entertaining things that can and have been done with this. But that's a nice, easy way to test your system for those type of vulnerabilities. Now let's see where's my mouse now? Oh no, I need to go to this. Okay, there's the mouse. And actually, I should probably be showing you what I'm doing right now. All right, so as you can see right here, I've put the decorator false right there, which is why it allowed that script to go through. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to stop this real quick. I'm going to comment this out just to show you, because one of the things I've learned is when I get told something works in a certain way, if there's no explanation for yes, that actually is what happens, I don't always trust it. So just real quick, I'm going to show you, and this is a very, very simple selection of code. I commented that out, and well, this is going to take a minute. Okay. And now if I just put in And I'm not even going to use that. I'm just going to use I'm just going to try bolding it. And here's the ugly error message I was telling you about before. Now, hopefully your users don't actually get this message. You're intercepting them and displaying a nice, there's been an error message. But this is, if you're allowing the failure to come across, this is what your users see if they try to put this in there. I don't know about you, but personally, I don't really consider the word test bolded to be particularly dangerous. So this really is very paranoid.
How smart is their script and HTML tag detection? Is it just matching those angle, those greater than less than signs, or does it know a dictionary of known tags that it goes through?
I'm not 100% sure how smart their tool is. I do believe that it is just running through a set of looking for, hey, do we see anything like this? And there's actually a good reason for that, because if they blacklist things as opposed to whitelist things, then someone who is creative will find something that they forgot to consider. There's a lot of places where scripts are camel case. People can be very creative, which is why you have to go with a whitelist solution rather than a blacklist solution. In this case, they're probably just detecting the tags. So to go a little further on the server side, we do have a tool called server.html encode that comes with .NET. This is ugly, but it's pretty good. What it'll do is it'll take the less than symbol right here, and it'll replace it with this ugly text right here. Now, who has seen one of their application, has been on a website and seen something like this? It's not ideal. It's not pretty. You go, what happened here? Well, what happened is that somebody went ahead and sanitized the input string to prevent cross-site scripting, and then didn't do anything else with it. It's a very viable and it's a very viable solution that works. Also, if you go with the double character set strings, there are a few extra rules. Personally, I've never actually played with Japanese characters in any of my code. So, now, if you want to undo this, you can just use server.decode. The other thing you can do is you can write your own little routine that will take a whitelisted selection of characters, or, well, tags, and say, if I see this specific tag, I'm going to trust it. Now, if you do this, be careful, because somebody might put something in there that you don't think about. Don't do you can do regex to allow for spaces, but don't allow them to put in any input unless you trust them, because people will put the script in an image tag. They will put the script in all sorts of interesting things if they think it'll work. And I don't know that. I haven't done the obfuscation myself. I'm not one of the people who's going to come here with all the creative things that they've done to attack you. Now, has anybody in here used AntiXXSS? So if you are looking through your code and you see sanitizer.getSafeHTML or sanitizer.getSafeHTML fragment, this is a library that has reached end of life. Does that mean it is bad? No. No, it doesn't. I don't know whether this is good or bad. What it means is, if somebody finds a flaw in this, it's probably not going to get fixed. So if you see this in your code, just be aware that you are looking at a protection that has passed beyond its end of life. Any questions on that? So it looked to me like most people here use Razor to some extent. There's a couple things we can do here. I call these safe-ish because it is protected. Is there going to be some flaw in this protection? I can't guarantee it one way or the other. But Microsoft probably did a pretty good job of making sure that it's not vulnerable. So if you just do @model.property, it is going to display your data in a safe manner. If you go for display for, it's going to be safe. If you do editor for, it's going to display the data that goes in that editor in a safe manner. Does everybody here use Razor? And for those of you who don't use Razor to generate this stuff, to display your data, do you use JavaScript libraries?
We just use Razor.
Okay, yeah. Most of my work is predominantly Razor. And then right here, if you want to display the HTML, if you want to allow the scripts that are contained in there to be executed, yes, you may have some point in your career where you come across a place where you want to let your user enter a script that you don't know what it does, but it's going to execute. Please vet your users for that. But HTML.raw will render the HTML and allow it to be executed. Key point here, if you are using web forms, these protections are not built in. If you display a value, just flat out, no tags, no nothing, it'll execute. That's raw HTML, unlike this. Now, real quick here, Knockout and Angular both come with methods to designate text as safe or dangerous. I didn't actually look up Vue and React, but I strongly suspect that they have their own method for addressing CrossSite scripting, given that it has been a key error for a long time. Here we have just a handful of links, different things that I've referenced while using this presentation. And oh, it's already there. Oh, okay. So that's what I did. So just real quick to show you how Razor renders, I'm going to allow CrossSite scripting again, and I'm going to pull up my view. While I'm doing a debug. And just right here, so I can show you what I'm doing, on the name, I'm using a text box for it. Over here where I have, and I'm doing a label for it. Over here on the bottom, I am generating I am doing the raw HTML for the description. So I can put whatever script I want safely into the name field on this. However, if I put it into the description, it should execute. So just the same script that I've been using so far. And as you can see, nothing happened there. And when I put it in description, because it renders raw HTML, the JavaScript executes. Are there any questions? Topics we can consider?
What kind of tools does .NET provide to help with SQL injection attacks?
That is a very good question, and unfortunately I did not come prepared for that one. I do know that most of my code has gone through, recently has gone through Entity Framework, and I do believe that Entity Framework does have some sanitation libraries built into it. I've also used Link to SQL, which I believe has some anti-injection libraries built into it. It's going to depend what tool you're using. Because there's places where you write raw HTML and you execute it, and in those cases, it would not provide protection. If you're using Entity Framework, from what I have seen, it does provide protection when you're going through its mapping.
Entity frameworks is a tight, very strong type tool set. So you can't pass a script in a number field because script is text and it will not render.
SQL injection use parameterized
Queries.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you use parameterized queries, you'll be safe. But if you're writing the SQL in a string, you can still do that through Entity Framework and many of the other ORMs. But if you allow that, you need to parameterize it. Otherwise, you're going to get SQL injection.
And one of the ways to test it is you can always copy and paste SQL queries and see you can, it's affecting. Can you drop the table and stuff like that in the UI? And step 2 is like with parameterized queries, Entity Framework, only the 2-3 parameters where it's coming, it will take that parameter and go. But you can make the Entity Framework if you put like 1 is equal to 1, like certain conditions. That one condition, if you put for Entity Framework, 1 is equal to 1, then it will break the Entity Framework. But what are the odds of anyone doing it? They have to go really way out of their way to break here. So basically, it's parameterized queries. If you don't even feel like parameterized queries with here, you can even go extra and put stored procedures. That's even or stored procedures in my mind are outdated. You can write for each screen view the EFS and thousands of lines of code. You can make it.
I would say that store procedures have their place still, in my opinion, but I will say that if you are using Entity Framework the way I am, where there's an entity object and I've put the values in it, I know that provides some protections. So, well, if there's nothing else, thank you all for your time. I hope you found this informative.